Hi, I'm Dr. Mercola. Welcome back. We're ready to dive deeper into the widespread problem of toxicity in our environment and how it has invited disease, obesity, and along with it, intervention through an endless supply of pharmaceutical drugs. Before we move forward, let's revisit some of the critical lessons we learned in episode 4. We learned an important difference between eliminating highly processed foods that cause an inflammatory reaction in your gut and an elimination diet which deprives our body of vital nutrients and doesn't give us the bacterial diversity to thrive. We also learned that when waging a war on the top 3 diseases of cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, one of your very best weapons should be consuming real foods. Imagine that. Last, we learned we can overcome our greatest fear of never getting back on track and having to sacrifice more generations to disease and suffering. Taking back control can happen starting today. It can happen starting now, and it starts with you. But will carry on for your kids and generations beyond that. So in episode 5, be prepared to learn how some doctors got fed up with conventional medicine and not seeing their patients get better. They took matters into their own hands. Similar to the shift I made in my early career. I placed the needs of my patients first, and the natural alternative solutions became obvious. We will reveal the truth about many pharmaceutical drugs with long lists of side effects that require other drugs to be managed properly. This compounds the problem and leaves you feeling hopeless and with an empty pocketbook on top of all that. Today, conventional medicine is simply inadequately prepared to address the underlying foundational cause of the disease. Instead, they use symptomatic band-aids to treat the symptoms. As a result, few people ever get better and frequently their conditions worsen. In this episode, you will have a better understanding of the pernicious, pervasive toxins like glyphosate that not only kills the bacteria in our soil, but in our gut, and also impacts the plant's nutrient profile and prevents them from creating nutrient-dense foods to eat, and in addition provides these additional toxins into our body. So what you're about to discover is scary and maddening, yet it will reveal the real truth about poor farming and manufacturing processes that have a significant impact on your health every single day.
You know, some of these procedures are so profitable, the hospital can function. I had one guy tell me one time, if this metabolic therapy comes to the time, we have to close these hospitals. We can't keep them open anymore.
Imagine that.
So they said, this is why it's very dangerous. And I said, dangerous to who? It's not dangerous to the cancer patient, it's dangerous to the profitability of the hospital.
Imagine the scenario where we start to ask, what is the root cause of heart disease, diabetes, everything else? At no point will we ever answer that question of what is the root cause. The answer will never be a drug. The answer will never be a drug. It will always be reconnect to your nature, reconnect to your food chain and everything else.
Hi, this is Dr. Mercola, and I hope you're enjoying the free series. And I want to give a special thank you to those of you that purchased the Fat for Fuel online course. The online course is designed to help you implement the tools and principles you've learned in Diet Against Disease so you can start achieving your health goals today. So take advantage of this limited time, massive savings during this free screening of Diet Against Disease. Learn more by clicking the link below.
Well, as someone who did go into medicine with an altruistic desire to help people, the tools we were given have lots of limitations, and basically the tools are medicines. Now, in my training as an internal medicine doctor, I learned to treat diabetes with medication. I learned to treat high blood pressure with medication. And the idea that a lot of doctors have is that, oh well, we're supposed to recommend lifestyle, but my patients will never do that. Or I've never seen someone change their lifestyle. So there's a thinking that people won't do it. Why bother? Let me just go for the medication. So, and that's come full circle for me now. I don't need the medicines. I don't really want them. Some of the medicines cause the problems themselves. So you're using medicine to treat the medicine's side effects. So I don't make excuses for medicines anymore. But I think a lot of doctors become frustrated because they don't see improvements in their patients. They want them, but it's because the tools they have don't work well. And in fact, when I go back, I think this is what every doctor wanted, right? To help their patient get better. So when a doctor is stuck with methods that don't work, it's going to affect them emotionally. In fact, they might get irritated, or they might get mad, or I've heard all sorts of things about doctors getting mad at patients that they're doing the wrong thing, but what they were telling them to do was wrong. So it creates all sorts of strange dynamics. And getting the right tool, changing to the holistic approach, including nutrition, is really fantastic.
So somehow you reached a breaking point. Do you remember it?
My transformation, if you will, or change, was a slow process. I, being a researcher, needed to see evidence. Actually, I visited doctors who were using a ketogenic diet at the time and saw results in other doctors' practices, but felt that that wasn't enough. We needed to do some research, and so we actually did studies to show in good journals, really good journals, to show that the level of evidence to support a ketogenic diet was there and that it was safe. So the decision I made really was one of being curious and following a signal, following data, seeing what other people, other doctors had done, but formalizing in a way that would not only convince me, but would convince the research and science community that this would be a healthy thing to do. So today I use what we helped to show in research as a valid tool, and it's a great job. It's fun, but so my response to this knowledge is to teach other people, as a natural tendency to want to spread the knowledge about how people's health can get better. Looking back, if there was any struggle, it was how to balance the new knowledge that I had, other people had, with a world that didn't believe it. And we're still struggling with that today. Even when the science is to the point where it's totally believable, people don't cite or don't read the science. So there's a struggle in terms of taking what you know and spreading the word in a world that doesn't want to hear it or has another agenda. But I learned early on to stick to my data, stick to my guns, and that has actually been a good rule to lead my life by.
But adapting to these new, innovative, far more effective strategies isn't easily implemented by most.
It's very seductive to hear about personalized medicine. You think it's about you, or you hear targeted therapy, you think it's about your cancer, when really all of it is still just a herd statistic. So even when they're talking about a targeted therapy, they're talking about looking at a genetic mutation and then saying this drug can have an impact on that pathway. But it may have an impact, it does have an impact on other pathways as well. But if you push your body into that position, your body, the adaptations that our bodies make to changes in what we feed ourselves, it's just a different mix of familiar foods given in a different proportion, and it has this incredible opportunity to target these pathways of cancer progression, but target it in a more global way instead of targeting it and causing normal cells to break down as well, which is what happens with targeted therapies. When you use diet, your normal cells stay healthy and the cancer cells are targeted. And you can do that with combinations of therapies too. You can, but when you hear these, these pharmaceutical ads and they're talking about, targeted drugs or personalized medicine, or and then you hear the long list of side effects, and I'm thinking, and what's the side effect of a ketogenic diet, really? What's the side effect? people look at it as a big toolbox. Oh, because then they can join a clinical trial, or but they don't understand even that the clinical trials are basically to provide information. They're not about you as a person. You know, if you look at a phase 1 clinical trial, it's not about the benefit that it's going to have to you. It's about the information it's going to provide to the drug company. I hate to say that, but that's what it is. That's going to either move their therapy forward into phase 2 and 3 trials, or at that, they're going to say, oh, well, no, it's not working for anybody, so we're just not going to do that drug anymore. The doctors who say it's a false sense of hope about ketogenic diet therapy and then turn around and offer their patients a phase 1 trial, they are offering hope to people. They may not put it in those words. They may not say those words. They can't say those words. But that's what they're doing. That's what they did to, they offered us a clinical trial. And I went, oh, hope. I didn't understand that it really wasn't about my son. It was just about them gathering information.
Hi, this is Dr. Mercola, and if you're enjoying the education provided in this free film series, please share it with your loved ones by clicking on the link below. It makes a massive difference, as you'll be providing them with potentially life-altering information to help them take control of their health.
If we look at pain medications on a whole, how many people every year die from the use, the proper use, the prescriptive proper use of pain medications? More than 32,000 people die annually from the proper use of pain medication. And this is what I saw in the hospital repetitively, people being prescribed these meds, not really getting better. And then what would happen next is we would put them in a surgical consult. The surgeon would come in, not even really look at their x-rays, not even really look at their MRIs, and just say, yeah, you're a great candidate for joint replacement surgery. Let's get you scheduled. This is my experience, so I don't speak for all doctors. I don't want to make a damning statement that all doctors in rheumatology are these horrible, non-caring people, because I can't speak for the rest of the world, but I can speak from my own experience. And in my own experience, what I saw was a passionless system that was a mill that was designed to drug people. The drug side effects were worse than the disease, and when they didn't really solve the problem or work, then it was a mill to put them into a joint replacement position where they now had to go and have a surgery. And even the surgery, that doesn't correct the problem. So now they have a surgery, they're sick people, they're chronically ill, they're malnourished, and then they go put them under surgery, and they don't recover or heal very well from the surgery. So now what was supposed to solve their problem actually ends up only creating more scar tissue, more loss of range of motion, more inhibited mobility. So now that person starts gaining weight, because their joints hurt when they walk on them, even their replaced joints. And so they become immobile. They don't want to move because it hurts. And the medications don't work very well. And it's this vicious cycle. And where does it end?
A lot of people will tell you to have faith in the conventional medical system because they believe it's backed by thorough research and scientific studies. The trouble with a lot of these studies, though, is that when it comes to medications and other treatments, is that the very research studies we all place our faith in are being funded by the same companies wanting to sell the drugs for huge profits at the end of the study. This can lead to what I believe are biased results despite regulations aiming to counter this bias. But don't take my word for it. Here's what happened to esteemed scientific researcher, Dr. Thomas Seyfried.
It was somewhere in the late 90s. So my student Mariana came back and she says, "Oh my stars, you can't believe all the stuff going on with ketogenic diets." So I said, "Okay, we got one of the best animal models of epilepsy, so let's see how it works on that." And sure enough, it was. We had also been doing some work on calorie restriction. It was very interesting, and at that time, substrate level restriction was being developed, drugs that would stop the synthesis of gangliosides in the brains of children, therefore that blocking the accumulation of the ganglioside. So we took this drug from a company in England and happened to put it on a brain tumor mouse just to see. It was not hypothesis driven too much. It was like, okay, gangliosides are in the tumors, this drug stops gangliosides. Is it possible that we might be able to restrict the gangliosides and have an effect on the tumor growth? So it turned out the drug was working really remarkably well. I said, oh my God. So I told the company in England that, hey, this drug that was supposed to be for Tay-Sachs disease actually can shrink some of these tumors. So they got very excited because the market for a drug that stops tumor growth was far greater than a market
Exponentially greater.
for a market that would target a rare, inborn error of metabolism. It's a very important and needed research on that disease, of course. But for a drug company to see a drug that would work on a tumor, they became very excited. So they gave us a substantial funding to figure out what's going on here with their drug, so that they could potentially market this as a new cancer therapy. So it turned out, as we were feeding this drug to these mice with brain tumors, of course the brain tumors got smaller and smaller. And then, but so did the body weight of the mice. And we were wondering what was going on. So we then found out in time that the drug blocked the ability of the mouse. He was eating all this food like it was going, and he was losing weight. So we figured out the drug blocked sucrase enzyme activity in the gut. So he was eating this food but couldn't digest the food. After we saw that, and we saw that the drug, the tumor is shrinking, looks really good, but the mouse is losing weight. So then I said, well, the control is the drug having specific effect on the tumor, or is it some just general effect on physiology? So we did a parallel study where we fed one group of mice the drug, and they ate and they lost weight. And then we had another group of mice where we didn't feed any drug, but just simply matched the body weight to the guys in the drug group. And the tumors were exactly reduced to the same size. So I said, what is going on here? So, of course, the company didn't want to hear anything about this. So your drug just makes the animal eat less food or can't digest the food. That's the way it's working. So then we did the parallel control studies with the calorie restriction. We found that the blood vessels went down even better than with the drug. So it was all calorie restriction. So then we published all these papers showing that calorie restriction is the most powerful anti-angiogenic therapy. And this is a big, pharmaceutical thing, is anti-angiogenic therapies. Blocking blood vessels are supposed to shrink tumors. Calorie restriction blocks blood vessels and shrinks tumors. So we were, published several papers showing the mechanisms by which it was all calorie. Of course, the drug company has since departed. They didn't want any. They didn't want any part of this. Here you're telling me you can get the same effect without using any pharmacy. That my drug was alerted you to the fact that this. So it's just the opposite. You'd want to do calorie restriction, then find some guy's drug that would work really good, as good. We've never found that. We've never found any drug that works as good as calorie restriction.
The trouble with trying to discover the truth about how to solve so many of society's health problems is that the pharmaceutical companies are shouting so loudly that it's hard for anyone else to be heard. They have huge budgets to advertise their latest drugs. But just because they are all we hear about in the media, it doesn't mean that what we're hearing is the truth.
My wife sometimes gets angry because I see these advertisements on television for some Opdivo or some immunotherapeutic drug that paints a very false image of what the actual situation is. I know intrinsically it's not going to work for the majority of people, and they make it look like, so the power of advertisement, when you know what they're advertising is misinformation, does that make me upset? Yes.
Has it been hard for you to see that a lot of your views have not been accepted?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's because they think that the top medical schools have the right answer. And when you go to a top medical school and you're evaluated by a team of white coats, and they come in and they say, we have a plan for you, and this is the plan for you, and this is the best, and all this other stuff. And you, of course, well, if this is a top medical school, they wouldn't be giving me misinformation like this. And then eventually, for a number of people, well, there's nothing more we can do. What do you mean there's nothing more you can do? There's a metabolic therapy out there. Why don't you know about that? They do know about it. They don't want to talk about it. It's not sanctioned by the AMA. Okay? It doesn't fit the plan for what they think the plan should be.
You'd wish they would find it. It would.
Well, it would change everything. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they're all of a sudden going to roll over and say, "Hey, we got to do metabolic therapies now."
Well, like Tom was saying, it's just getting to the truth. The fundamental truths of why people get disease. Cancer being a nasty one, of course, but all the others, and many of them have this fundamental flaw that's not being addressed. And usually exacerbated by corporate greed. It's just a matter of being strategic and implementing the effective communication process to essentially seed the truth to a significant number of people. And once people understand it, you can't control it. It's going to snowball out of control. It's very simple. Needless pain and suffering and premature deaths. That's what it is. That's the simple summary. I mean, people are suffering, their relatives and loved ones are suffering, and there's no need for it. And most of them can be prevented with adoption of these principles, which are not that hard. They're really pretty simple. It's a pretty simple concept. And the beauty of it is that it's easy to implement. People can take control of their health. They don't have to rely on these experts to control the situation. They don't need to take the drugs. They need some coaching, but it's a whole different model than prescribing toxic and expensive pharmaceutical drugs.
Yeah, well, not only that, sometimes it makes the patient worse.
Yeah.
You know, so that's also related to the problem. It's a metabolic problem that's not being treated with a metabolic solution. Right?
But that's the beauty of metabolic therapy and nutritional ketosis, is that once your body has transitioned to the point where you're burning fat as your primary fuel, there's this magic that occurs in your brain, and this desire,
yes,
these cravings
could be.
are radically suppressed to the point where it's not an exercise in willpower or discipline to refuse those. Because if you're burning carbohydrates as your primary fuel, then it is.
Yeah.
But that transition makes it easy. So you just walk away and say, fine, I used to like it, but I don't need it anymore.
Yeah. Type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, they're all cousins of each other. Mm-hmm. They're all related. Cancer is just one of the branches, you know, but all of these things are what we call chronic diseases. And they represent the largest amount of health care in the country. You know, broken legs and arms, hip replacements, these are not the drivers of the medical field. It's these chronic diseases, which are great because people who stop smoking, this was a great, they live longer now because they stop smoking. But now they get type 2 diabetes and all these things they would have never lived to have. So they become a great cash cow. You keep them alive longer, they're going to get sick from other things, and you can then treat them for these things. Because you can't make money on a dead person. I mean, I think this should be a part of every oncology program in the country should have a department of metabolic therapy. You know, some of these procedures are so profitable the hospital can function. I had one guy tell me one time, if this metabolic therapy comes to the time, we have to close these hospitals. We can't keep them open.
Imagine that.
Yeah, we have to close hospitals because we can't generate the revenue that pays for the other procedures that don't make much money. So they said, this is why it's very dangerous. And I said, dangerous to who? It's not dangerous to the cancer patient, it's dangerous to the profitability of the hospital.
I think that it was just, it's an outspringing of the Hippocratic Oath in some ways, in the sense that we're told to take this oath that we will do no harm, and then we're given a toolbox that does harm. And so it's very frustrating as a physician emerging from kind of this very exciting time when you're learning so much biology and physiology and disease pathways and pharmaceutical pathways, and you think you're just so empowered walking away from medical school training, and then I think it's somewhere in residency where we start to have some cracks in our paradigm, because when you spend a lot of time in the ICU or in the bone marrow transplant unit and you're just seeing the most extreme end of disease management, it becomes pretty obvious that our tools are extremely toxic and can be extremely injurious. And you take an example of autoimmune disease, all of our immune modulator drugs are horrendous. I mean, you can get cancer from them, you get all of these horrible metabolic disarray and everything else from just a run of steroids or the biologics and things like this. So our tools are inherently dangerous. And it's because of what you point to, really, is that they're not at the root cause. And I was researching cancer and tumor cells and how to kill them and all of this, and developing kind of novel chemotherapy pathways in my biomedical research, and simultaneously I was working in the clinics doing endocrinology, which was a lot of diabetes and all of this. And when you're really steeped in that research, you start to realize that obviously the cause of cancer is not a lack of chemotherapy. And so, same thing, the cause of a heart disease is not because you have a lack of statins. And so the drugs that we're given are so far from a root cause of management. And instead, I think it's a little bit truth in advertising these days, we call it chronic disease management. That's the Western medicine allopathic paradigm now. And so we're given all of these tools for chronic disease management that are Band-Aids on the surface of these conditions and not getting at the base physiology.
So the two things about emergency medicine, number one, it's the safety net. So we're catching people at their worst with their emergency, maybe after 20 years of not taking care of themselves, kind of falling off the cliff. And as the doctor, you're responsible for pulling them back to at least a stable place, but it's not fixing the problem. So I got really interested in, where did these problems begin, the ones that people are coming in to see me for. Sometimes over and over again, people would end up in the emergency room and I'm really searching for causes. I got really tired of just the treatment perspective, just the rescuing, just the medications. What is it about the life they lived that got them to that point? How did you get to where you are with your health challenge, and what are the reversible causes? Because if we look at the reversible causes, we actually can make it dissolve. Let me say one thing about diagnosis. So a lot of people, their health starts to break down and they know it first, right? They can't function the way they used to, whether it's they're feeling fatigued or their brain feels foggy. They just don't have the energy, but they don't have a diagnosis. And maybe they go to their doctor 5 or 10 times looking for a diagnosis because they know something's wrong with their body. Those early stages of health breakdown, when you know something is wrong, and it may be a combination of putting on weight and your mind just not being as clear and your energy level being lower, those are steps on the way to really having a chronic disease. And if you stop in that point and you start to take some of the interest in tracking back where is this coming from rather than looking for a diagnosis and a treatment, you may be able to undo the problem before you even get to the point of needing a diagnosis or treatment. You can literally start to undo it. And environmental toxins are a huge part of that. You start removing those, your body gets unburdened, and then your life goes back to the way it used to be. You can become younger in terms of the way your body functions. That's my huge argument with chronic disease. Why, when you just get a brand new diagnosis, do they call it a chronic disease? You just got it. You haven't had it for very long. Why is it suddenly chronic? Well, they're calling it that because it's a way to say, oh, you're gonna have that for the rest of your life. And I'd like to argue that that's a bad term because it labels somebody with something that they supposedly can't get rid of. So many of those, if you figure out some of the underlying causes, you can undo them, you can reverse them, you can get rid of them completely. So if I can say anything, don't get too attached to the name somebody gives to the derangement of your body at that moment, because that's not the important thing. The important thing is how can we figure out how to undo where you got and just make it all dissolve. Make that title, make that label, make that diagnosis no longer matter. That's not what to get attached to. What to get attached to is that vibrant, healthy feeling. How do we back up to when you had that?
The pharmaceutical world is one that I participated in for 17 years. I was a researcher participating in the creation of chemotherapy. I was researching many other chemicals that were used for everything from diabetes to hypertension and all these other conditions out there. And it was a sobering moment as a chemotherapy developer when I realized that cancer and the development of cancer has absolutely nothing to do with a lack of chemotherapy. So if we are treating with our main treatment approach, chemotherapy for cancer, we are clearly not going down a root cause scenario.
So I refer to conventional medicine often as cookbook medicine because it's almost like there's a recipe for every diagnosis. There's a set of symptoms, these sets of symptoms, if they check mark the boxes for this diagnosis, equal this diagnosis, and then here's the standard of care treatment. End of story. And for a couple of things, like acute infection and trauma, Western conventional medicine is, super helpful, and we need it for those things. But when it comes to, chronic disease, the problem with symptoms, diagnosis, treatment is that very little of the time is there ever a question of, well, why? Why are these symptoms being created? Like, okay, we can label it and the label just allows for ease of conversation, but it's very reductionistic. And it doesn't give people any insight or options or avenues for making themselves well, which, I think is almost like a birthright. Our bodies are self-healing, and so it doesn't honor that. It doesn't allow for that truth to be available to people.
Thankfully, many experts are looking at alternatives to conventional medicine, and I'm back with Zach to talk about the lessons he's learned in his progress towards more naturalized, human-friendly medicine. Legally prescribed drugs in the United States kill over 100,000 individuals every year. Additionally, the whole conventional medical system is responsible for many mistakes and even properly implemented therapies that kill another 100 or 200,000 a year. So, Dr. Bush, you've been in the system for a while, you've experienced it firsthand. What would you be some of your best strategies to remove ourselves from that system?
The first is really confidence. We need to move into this as physicians and consumers and patients with a sense of confidence that we have the ability inside of us to heal. And that reality of healing or that health transformation is one that is actually pretty rare to be taught, especially as physicians. But you need to be able to really grasp the reality that if there is a root cause of health, it's certainly not a pharmaceutical medication, it's certainly not a chemical in your food chain. And so step one is conviction, I think, of being really clear that health is not going to come from the pharmacy. The next piece is going to be really going after the possibility that you need a team around you. The vast majority of us are going to really benefit from some oversight. So I strongly recommend, if you are on pharmaceuticals, that you're going to work with an integrative medicine team around this. Make sure there's a nutritionist on the team, whether they're meeting with you in person or online. So many options now to reach out and hit a really great nutritionist to help walk you through this parallel to that physician who's watching the opportunities to peel back the medications. By and large, there is no need to go cold turkey on anything. Weaning off medications is always a good approach, and so you don't have to feel like success only comes from that rapid dumping of the medication bag. So have a team around you, put in as many disciplinary tools as possible. What does that include? Certainly the nutritionist piece, certainly the physician who has the physiology experience of using a medication and tapering it off. And then the third piece is somebody needs to be engaged in the emotional content here. You need somebody, whether it's an emotion code therapist or NEAT or psychotherapist, you need somebody really engaged at the deep level to help you untangle the emotions of disease.
Now, please understand, one of the most important principles in Diet Against Disease is to eat real food. 95% of the food that Americans eat are processed foods. That is a simple strategy. Drink pure, clean water, eat real food. When you eat processed foods, it's going to be damaged. You're not going to get the nutrient-dense foods that you need. Plus, it's also going to be electron deficient. And you need electrons to function well. And if the electrons aren't in your food, you're going to have to take them away from your other tissues and supplement that, which is going to decrease your body energy, your body voltage, and it will worsen your health. So please, please eat real processed foods as much as you can. And organic. Remember organic, because if it's not organic, there's a high likelihood it's going to be contaminated with an herbicide that can easily be a mitochondrial poison for you. So I would strongly encourage you to consider eating mostly organic. Now, if you're on a tight budget, you can go to sites that have lists of like the cleanest vegetables and the ones that are less likely to cause problems if they're non-organic, and then you can use them. Those avocados would be a good one. They typically don't need to be organic because they have very thick skins, so you don't have to have all organic. But if you do, you could have a healthy looking vegetable like a strawberry or something. It looks great, but it's sprayed with all these poisons that you're going to get less nutrient value. It's going to be ultimately a negative for your body than it is positive. Even though you think you're eating healthy, you're just not. So please pay attention to the details and eat organically whenever possible.
There's so many toxic things in our food supply that we have come to think of as normal. And those foods are killing people. And those foods are causing heart disease and diabetes, and they're causing dementia and Alzheimer's, and they're causing people to get overweight and obese, and it's causing so much suffering unnecessarily. And there's a way to eat that brings more joy and more peace of mind and a more happy life in so many ways. And I get to be a part of lots of people learning that and putting that into practice and having happier lives and having more open hearts and having more love and more joy and more pleasure and loving life more, loving themselves, each other, the people they love, being able to show up for the people they love.
I was starting to read a lot in the medical environment at the University of Virginia on the power of nutrition to affect cancer and affect other chronic diseases, type 2 diabetes reversal. All of that science was starting to change my paradigm at the university. And I ended up leaving in 2010, and it was really steeping myself in the nutritional therapy of chronic disease where I started to really open my mind up to the possibility of a root cause. And so what we were seeing is we were juicing people into oblivion, so much kale that their eyes would turn green, and we were really dumping a lot of nutrient into these patients and finding that 40% of them weren't tolerating even small amounts of healthy food. More bloating, more gut discomfort, more inflammation, more morning stiffness, more joint pain, more fatigue, brain fog. And it's from some of the most incredible superfoods on the planet. We're making them worse. And so this was forcing us down this pathway of what's the root cause of inflammation? If the food itself is inflammatory, what's the root cause of that? And so we were going down this pathway, and ultimately we stopped asking questions about the food and started to ask questions about the soil the food was grown in. And that's where the big paradigm shift in my career really happened. In 2012, asking the questions about the soil, a colleague of mine brings in a white paper on soil science. It was 90 pages long. Blew my mind. I didn't know there was 90 pages known about soil. And so we were diving into this paper, and I was paging through it quickly. And in the middle of one of the pages is a molecule that any other day of the week I may have just flipped past and not recognized. But that day, the blinders were taken off, and this molecule actually has this cluster of oxygen-hydrogen binding compounds at the end of it. This molecule has a stable carbon backbone and then all of this potential for exchange of electrons. And that's where my cancer research had been in, was mitochondrial redox potential, or reduction in oxidation or exchange of electrons. And so in that moment, suddenly realized that the soil might have the secret to the mitochondria. And the mitochondria are like bacteria that live inside of our cells. They metabolize or break down macronutrients into the only fuel that we really function on, which is this ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And that ATP molecule, the thought that it could be modulated by something in the soil was a huge boon for us. It took us a couple months to realize it was the bacteria in the soil that was making that molecule. And then it was closed the loop. Suddenly it was like, well, that's where life begins. It begins with this incredible interface of the soil and water and the exchange of electrons down at that micro level where life starts to begin. So doesn't it make sense that the root cause of disease would actually be the root cause of disease would be the loss of health, and health would be the communication network created by the bacteria speaking to the mitochondria, creating fluent speech. And when you look across the population right now, we're seeing diseases in every organ system becoming epidemic, right? You got diabetes, you got autism, you've got cancer, all of them rising at this very fast rate. And so the fundamental connection to all of these disease processes are down there, as you say, in the metabolism or breakdown of our food chain. And so it's fascinating that the nutrition world, which I love, engaging in, and we're always traveling to all these nutrition conferences all over the world to speak, and we're passionate about it. But the reality is, even at our passionate level of expertise in the field, we keep talking about macronutrients and micronutrients on the plate as if that's what we're feeding ourselves. We are 3 times removed from the food on our plate. The human cells cannot take a piece of broccoli and do anything with it. The human cell cannot take a piece of kale and do anything with it. Can't take a piece of meat and do anything with it. You have to get through this complex system of not just the bacteria, but the protozomes and all these little breakdown machines that they make, enzymes that are deteriorating that food down into a bioavailable source of nutrient. And so your bacterial biome becomes this incredible delivery system. And it's fascinating to think that each bacterial population, each little species and subspecies of the bacteria are taking care of one little niche. But if you live in an environment where we're steeped in antibiotics and we're killing the biome through our farming practices, through our harvesting practices, through the food preparation and food processing, we narrow that biome down to maybe 1,000 or a couple thousand species. It doesn't matter what you put on the plate now, you don't have avenues for those unique micronutrients to be made bioavailable. We're literally starving as a population.
So one of the areas that contributes to this is, of course, the use of antibiotics. People may not realize them. They've not been around a long time, a little more than half a century. And of course it has a decimating effect on your microbiome, and the toxins, the industrial toxins and chemicals are exposed to doesn't help anymore either. And then the industrial farming shift to really monocropping, to limit the amount of foods, different variety of foods that we're eating, and frequently, because they're using potent herbicides like glyphosate in the soil, you're decimating the soil microbes to begin with, so they're growing on a sterile environment, almost like hydroponics. Key here is the microbial diversity has been radically diminished.
Yeah. 83%, by population are being exposed to some sort of antibiotic drug per year. Amazing amount. But that's 4 times surpassed by the amount of antibiotic drugs that are being used in our farming practices. So it's almost 30 million pounds a year now being dumped into cattle, poultry, and the pork industries. And the U.S. is by far leading. Unfortunately, that is grossly outnumbered and outstripped by a drug or chemical in our environment that we don't call an antibiotic but functions as an antibiotic, and that's the herbicide. So the weed killers that are out in the world for crop production, the biggest one in the world right now is glyphosate. And this glyphosate chemical that was patented back in 1976 by a small company called Monsanto was targeting actually a pathway in the bacteria. And so it's called the shikimate pathway, and it blocks the ability of bacteria to make essential amino acids. And so you're taking away 3 to 5 really critical amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, the building blocks that will become enzymes and the machines of your body. Those are being blocked at the soil level. So you spray herbicide out there, you're killing not only the bacteria in there, you're killing their ability to produce the essential nutrients that the food would then carry. We are now spraying 2 billion kilograms of glyphosate in the soils of the earth worldwide every year. And that number keeps doubling every 6 years. And so it's extraordinary, the chemical exposure we have that's wiping out and decimating the biome at the soil level, which then impacts the plant nutrient, which then, of course, whether it's the animal or the human that's consuming that, is deficient.
It takes decades before we establish the science to confirm that there is toxicities there, and these are starting to come out. And I believe that glyphosate use will decrease, but it doesn't matter because they've got 4 or 5 others lined up that's going to take 10 or 20 years to replace them. That'll probably be every bit as dangerous, if not more dangerous.
This isn't just Monsanto's fault or some biotech company's fault. We as consumers got lazy, stopped producing our own food, and outsourced it, right? And so through the outsourcing of food production, we kind of gave over control. So I think we're complicit in this whole creation of the genetically modified crop. And now we have 2 amino acid pathways that are going to break down multiple pathways, and it's just we're right on the brink of human extinction, it feels like. The loss, I think, is probably too scary to really guess at. I think when we start to talk about endangered species and truly, eliminated species of microbiome, I'm afraid that we've probably had a 90% loss over the last couple 100 years of this. We've been, like you said, for a long time looking to microbial health as probiotics as the source, right? And so we've been told if you want to return biome to the gut, and there's this new respect over the last 20 years for that microbiome, use your probiotic. Well, of course, the probiotic is very narrow in spectrum. So you got 3 species, sometimes as many as 24 species, 1 or 2 on the market with 100 species. But if you're taking the same 3 or 24 species day in and day out at 35 billion copies or now 1 trillion copies, you're creating a uniculture, right? And you're creating this very narrow spectrum within that ecosystem. And so the massive shift that happened in 2012 when we were studying the soil and found these little weird microbial metabolites down there in the soil was the discovery that the bacteria were talking. And so this communication network that we discovered in 2012 is produced by the bacteria when they are digesting food. And so through their digestive process, they make all these side products or metabolites that function as a communication network between them. And that communication network turns out to be one of these phenomenal pieces you're talking about. And so what we are doing now is we're extracting that communication network from fossil soils and putting that back into the human gut. And it's been a total game changer.
Stephanie, I know that you're really interested when it comes to toxicity. I know you're really interested in finding out what some of these sources are for people.
Yeah.
What are they, and how can people get rid of these things?
Well, I mean, I think, there's across the board so many types of exposures over the course of our lifetime, every single day. Every time we eat food that's been grown conventionally, it's been sprayed with pesticides. Every time we drink out of a plastic bottle or a plastic cup, there's chemicals that are leaching from plastic. Every time we put something on our skin, whether it's a lotion or certain sunscreens, they all contain ingredients that disrupt the endocrine system, that add chemicals that seep into our system. The water we drink, the exhaust fumes from cars, the exposure to certain metals. A lot of people talk about heavy metals, and comes both from mercury filled fillings, from certain ingredients from vaccines, from fish that we eat, larger fish that eat smaller fish and accumulate mercury in there. And then in addition to that, one of the kind of more recent understandings are biological toxins that come from organisms that we are exposed to or acquire, whether it's certain bacteria that our immune systems kill off, and those produce endotoxins that our immune systems can or can't clear. Mold is another one, so being exposed to mold, and not the spores themselves, but again the toxins that are released that some people's immune systems aren't able to get rid of on their own. So the list is endless.
How do we get rid of them?
So in conventional medicine, they always say, oh, we have a liver for that. What are you talking about? Toxic buildup. And that might have been true maybe 100 plus years ago, when the amount of toxic exposure was met by the ability for the liver to keep up with clearing it. And nowadays, though, the impact is so much higher and accumulates so much faster by just the way that we live, and in addition to that, we have these defense mechanisms that are part of the detoxification process. Our microbiome, for example, that have been compromised. So our livers might be fine, but our microbiome, which is part of the biotransformative process to allow toxins to escape the system, escape the body, have been impacted by actually oftentimes those same toxins that we get exposed to. So we can get rid of them by first reducing your exposure. If you can slow the amount of accumulation, you have better opportunity to support your system in getting to a healthier baseline that is able to clear a lot of those toxins. But you can change, add certain foods that help with detoxification. You can, work with supplements. You can work with, another major way of getting toxins out of the body is through sweating. And whether that's, through exercise or sauna, like heat therapy. You can make sure that your digestion stays very efficient, because that's another major escape route for toxins is, through elimination. And if you have digestive issues and things aren't working as well as they could, then you get toxins accumulating because they don't have a way out. I think probably the lowest hanging fruit is just reducing your exposure. So put a filter on your water source to get rid of some of the major compounds that are toxicants, like fluoride, for example. The other things are clearing out your household products and changing them out for more natural products. So there was an article actually that I posted this past week from like a major news source that confirmed that laundry detergents have carcinogens in them with all the fragrances and the over fragrancing of our lives with Febreze and Glade plugins and all this deodorizing stuff that is really toxic. So I think probably more than anything, like the biggest impact would be from just greening your home and greening your life and making choices that just reduce the impact, that to allow your body to catch up to what it is designed to do naturally.
The very fascinating thing about repopulating the microbiome on your body is you don't need to eat it. We think of fermented foods and probiotics and all this, but the reality is every time you breathe, you're bringing in all these microflora into your nasal passages, up into the big bronchi, airways, and all of that becomes the biome of your gut. And so very fast repopulation just through breathing your environment and getting into those ecosystems. So if your health is starting to fail, think about where is your macro ecosystem and what is it looking like? Because if you can really push that, if you can push diversity in your macro environment, you're going to mimic that at the micro environment. And so if your day involves getting up out of bed and you're in an air-conditioned house and then you go into your garage and get into an air-conditioned car and you drive to work and you live in or you work in an air-conditioned building and then you go home through the same pathway, you're like in this little sterile bubble moving around in this tiny non-existent ecosystem. It's going to be very challenging for you to repopulate. And so what you're going to need to do instead is break out of that. Get out into the garden first thing in the morning after you've done your stretching and breathing. Get out there and breathe in the garden. Pull some weeds. You don't need a weed killer. We've, for thousands of years, pulled those weeds out with our hands. As soon as you pull it, what just happened? You just went airborne with all those soil microbes. You're in that biome. And then you're taking that weed and putting it in your compost pile and building all that nitrogen back in so that you can put that back in.
One of these that I've actually learned from Hippocrates Health Institute is sunflower seed sprouts. And what you see here is actually an overgrown section because I've been traveling recently, I didn't have time to harvest it and grow some newer ones, but essentially these are sunflower seed sprouts. And they are 30 times more nutrient dense than the organic vegetables you grow in your garden. So it makes sense to do it even if you live in a studio apartment or in a college dorm. You can grow these things. I'm going to show you how to do it now, a very important resource. You can buy these in the health food store, $30 a pound. I'm going to show you how to make them for about 25 cents a pound. This is basically the recipe I'm describing here will make you about 1.5 pounds of these. And when you're sprouting them, it's an 8-hour process, so you put healthy water and then this lid, it can twist so that's sitting on the bottom, and then you just fill it up with water and let it soak for about 8 hours. Yeah. 8 full hours. Excellent. And then when it's out, you take it out and rinse it, soak it with clean water from the tap and then rinse it, and then you twist the cup so that it rests on the ledge and there's a space at the bottom where the seeds can drain so you don't get mold or anything. So then at about a day you're at this level and you can see in the camera how there's little tails, white tails on many of the seeds, and that's when you know they're ready to be planted. So what do you plant them in is the key thing. Okay. These are a little hard to find. The bigger trays are less hard, but this is I think 11 by 11, somewhere in that range. It's a little less than a foot. And I like them because it's an individual serving. And then I don't have to fill it, so all the way up, maybe halfway up. Yeah. And then after these seeds are sprouted, then I will just spread them relatively evenly throughout the pan, or the tray actually, to be more precise. Perfect. And now we're going to use your fingers to distribute them.
Mind if I give it a shot?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So.
Yeah.
evenly distributed.
As easily as you
makes
can, yeah. I mean, it's not, you don't have to be perfect, it's just close, you know. So you don't want to need wide gapping holes, you know.
Yeah. Okay.
Relatively evenly distributed, as you can see. Jonathan's done a magnificent job.
Thank you.
So you're going to want to water this every day, every 24 hours, with maybe about this much water, maybe about 4 ounces. You don't need a lot of water initially. They don't need a lot. And one of the benefits of doing it this way is that it will retain the moisture in the soil. So it's like it's got really high humidities, which these sprouts require to grow. So you'll check it. It's somewhere between 2 and 3 days, and you're going to water it every day, so you'll notice it. But at some point, we don't have something to show you here, so it will come up, and you will see little whitish clear seeds coming up. And at that point, then they'll be white, and they're not exposed to any sunlight, so it'll be pretty white. I mean, the ones that peek through the side can be green because there's sunlight on the outside. But the process of photosynthesis, you have to have sunlight. You can't make it in the dark.
So can I just eat some?
Yeah. But you can try one.
All right.
Just to try it.
Okay,
they
so
are edible.
Just, what do I do?
Here, just pinch it off right there.
So
look, it's got your name on it. This one's got your name on it.
This one? All right, well then I'll have to turn this around so the camera
it's got
can
your
see.
name on it.
All right, so this one here.
Yeah, perfect.
And I just pinch it rather than pull it out by the roots.
Right, you don't want to eat the roots. Just pinch
dirty.
it. Yeah.
Okay, and then just...
The way you harvest this is the other thing too, before you eat that. You can. It's just cut it with a sharp knife or a pair of scissors at the base, above the soil.
Yep.
You don't pull them out.
Grab it, and then you pull off these if they're still on there, so you don't eat them.
Yeah, no, you can eat those. Those are fine. They're perfectly nutritious. That's where actually all the fat and the oil is. And when you eat you can eat sunflower seeds, right?
That's a good point.
There's nothing wrong with those. Those aren't.
I wasn't thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, that
Try it.
tastes fine.
Try it.
All right, so here we go. Tastes good.
Yeah, it tastes. It's one of the.
It's kind of juicy. Like it's got.
It does. There's a lot of water in there, and
it's
one
flavorous. It's absolutely delicious, and that was my first time having a fresh sprouted sunflower seed.
Can't be much
sprout.
fresher. That was like within a minute.
I've got many colleagues with case studies and success cases where you test for some of the persistent chemicals in the body, meaning they get in and they don't easily get out. So over time, if you begin to change the way you eat, if you begin to add just a few things to help your body detoxify, then literally the weight starts dissolving, and maybe not just the weight. Some people's diabetes has disappeared along with those fat cells as gently the toxins move out of the body and the fat moves with it. I think the most important part is becoming aware of what chemicals, what metals, what toxins that the body doesn't want to deal with are in your environment, which can you easily avoid or substitute out, and then make space for your body to do what it does well, which is right the ship, rebalance itself. And it can do that if we start removing what's getting in the way.
I would say the people that maybe have metabolic disturbances that doesn't allow them to process fat, or they're more toxic, if they kick into ketogenesis, one of the problems is you start burning weight or burning fat. I dropped 5 pounds in 2 or 3 days. The problem is that toxins often sit in our fat tissue because the toxins we struggle with getting rid of are fat-soluble toxins, right? If you drink a water-soluble toxin, you can urinate it out pretty easily. That's what your urine is. But the fat-soluble toxins like to stick in us. And obesity has actually been kind of termed as like toxin storage, rent-free toxin storage. Just put the toxins in the fat, hide it so that the body doesn't see it. And so when you kick into ketogenesis, if all of a sudden you drop those fat cells, drop your fat pounds, those toxins have to come out. And once those toxins come out, you have to deal with them. And if you can't deal with them, if you have methylation problems or poor detox pathways, then you're going to feel worse. And so those are some of the people that we won't kick into full ketogenesis in the beginning. We'll do a lower carb, we'll work on the methylation cycles, we'll do a detox, and then we can kick them into ketogenesis later.
When you say methylation cycles, what do you mean?
So the methylation cycles is kind of a vague word for discussing how humans really detoxify. Methylation is a cycle that occurs in every cell of the body. Anything that makes energy has to methylate in order to detoxify those energetic processes. Methylation is also used to break down our drugs. It makes our neurotransmitters. So methylation is really used for so much. too many people kind of get lost in methylation as it being the cure-all, and it is extremely important for the body, and it's something you need to focus on and optimize your pathways, but it's not the end-all, be-all. So the methylation, primarily when we're talking about it in the ketogenic diet, is mostly revolving around detoxification.
And how do you detoxify people?
So it really depends on the person. We, at my office, we like to do really personalized medicine instead of just saying, oh, you've got these symptoms, here's the supplements we're gonna put you on. We like to check homocysteine levels, inflammatory levels, we like to review genetics, and based on their genetics and based on their levels, we put together an individualized supplement plan for them in order to speed up their methylation pathways. And once you speed up their methylation pathways, they're naturally detoxifying. But if someone struggled with heavy metals, that's an even longer standing methylation problem. Methylation helps us get rid of heavy metals. Well, if you had a significant exposure and you didn't have the methylation pathways to handle those, first step is to optimize the methylation pathways. Then you start working on pulling some of those heavy metals out of storage, and then trying to get rid of them through the methylation cycle. You can also use, we like to use the Metagenics plans, the Ultra Clear plans, which are basically canned detox programs. They've got a 10-day program and a 28-day program. It comes with food guides, it comes with a protein powder that's a detox shake, it comes with pills, that's detox pills. And so all these things are designed to ramp up our liver detox pathways, phase 1 and phase 2, to actually kind of make these fat-soluble toxins water-soluble so that you can urinate and poop them out.
I heard you speak recently and really explore or expand on a comment or a concept that I've never been exposed to before, but I think has a dramatic potential to radically improve people's health for a wide variety of reasons. So I'm wondering if you can expand on the concept first, and then expand on your concept of exercise too, because it is such a critical part of the equation of being healthy. I mean, it's clearly avoiding toxins, eating the right foods, establishing the intercellular communications, but exercise is key too. Largely for increasing these metabolic pathways like PGC1 alpha that improves mitochondrial function. It all gets back to the mitochondria.
And I would argue not only does it get back to the mitochondria, you can't have mitochondria healthy without the bacteria, without that biome. And so the microbiome is related to exercise, which is so exciting to realize that when we eat, we're not feeding the human body, we're feeding the microbiome, which is then feeding our mitochondria, which is then feeding us. When we exercise, I believe we're first feeding the microbiome that is then feeding us, that is allowing the muscles to take off.
Okay, I'm not going to let you get away with that. You're going to have to expand on that because that's a very intriguing concept, and help us understand what you mean by that.
Absolutely. And so one of the most profound shifts in my understanding of human biology has come around breathing. The only way to really breathe healthy is through the nose. Let me tell you for a moment what the position of breathing should be. And so 90% of the time that you're awake or asleep, your tongue should be pressed against the roof of your mouth. And this is very difficult for a lot of people because of lack of nutrient in the womb. They have a misformed palate. They have a very high arched palate, and it's hard to get the tongue up there. But in an ideal situation, tongue's pressed against the roof of the mouth, relaxed, which means it's come forward out of the throat and is moved up and is pressing against the roof of the mouth in an extended, relaxed fashion. And that blocks the whole mouth airway. And by blocking that, you force nasal breathing. Nasal breathing is one of the most powerful ways to trigger nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is one of the only communication redox molecules made by the human body. And it's triggered by the passage of air across the nasal passages. Well, when you breathe across the nasal passage and aerate the sinuses, nitric oxide releases, opens up blood flow, and changes the ability of the mucosa to exchange oxygen. But before you ever get oxygen through the mucosa to the human cell, you're getting oxygen to the bacteria. When you nasal breathe, you're creating an aerated sinus environment so you can have anaerobes and aerobes and this diverse thing. If you mouth breathe all the time, which is very common now, and especially in your chronic disease population, so major depression to cancer, look at their breathing pattern. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to find they're mouth breathing for one reason or another. So your population with obstructive sleep apnea or chronic snoring are mouth breathing all the time, so all night long they're changing their biome. And so whether it's good sleep patterns like you mentioned, a good sleep pattern is not going to happen until you get your mouth closed and nasal breathe.
Is it becoming clear to you now why the medical system and pharmaceutical companies are making so much noise? They're trying to drown out the voices that call out the real solution to our problems. And it's not a new expensive drug, it's not a fancy machine or a long hospital stay. The solution is as simple as getting rid of the toxins in our lives by eating better, getting outside and back into our natural environment, exercising and breathing well. And Dr. McCullough has a few more suggestions for ridding ourselves of all these pervading toxins.
I've been deeply studying natural medicine for a quarter of a century now. And one of the first encounters I had in developing this understanding was the appreciation that much of chronic disease is actually caused by dental infections in our mouth and by the poisons they put into our mouth. And many people don't realize that it's very common for dentists to have a greater influence on our health than our physicians. So one of the first steps is to understand that if you have a silver filling in your mouth, it really shouldn't be there. Now, is it a high priority to remove it? Not necessarily. It might not be causing you much harm, but there's no way it's improving your health. It's only causing negative impacts on you, because every time you chew, you're going to be liberating this mercury, which is a neurotoxin. It should not be in your mouth. So another reason why you just don't want heavy metals like mercury in your body, or really any heavy metals, is that they damage your mitochondria. They are mitochondrial poisons. They destroy your cell's ability to function by interfering with this very sophisticated and complex electrochemical system. They inactivate enzymes that cause cells to malfunction. And the most common metals that cause this are mercury, lead, cadmium, and arsenic. So you've got to be particularly careful of it. And one of the new ones now is thallium, which is being used as an additive in gasoline that replaced the lead that they took out a few decades ago. That was there's just no way it should have ever been put as an additive in gasoline, other than these large corporations, the petroleum companies, decided that it was going to be a way that they could remove the knocking from the gasoline and also increase their profits. So anyway, these heavy metals are an issue, and you have to be really cautious and aware of them and take aggressive measures to make sure that you don't incorporate them into your system, and once you have them, and check for them, that you take measures to remove them. So in addition to getting mercury from your fillings, you can also get it from the food that you're eating, and the most common way that you can get it is seafood, which is why you want to stay away from most seafood, because it's loaded with mercury. And this is an artifact. You may, well, how did they get mercury in the seafood? Well, let me explain to you the process. For the longest time, we burned coal to generate electricity. And up until recently, it was the majority of electricity generated in the United States. And what's embedded in the coal is mercury. So when you burn coal, the mercury vaporizes, it goes up into the air, it rains down into the environment, and eventually into streams and rivers, and it goes into the ocean, and it stays in the ocean at a certain level, and it gets bioaccumulated in the fish. The bigger the fish, the more mercury they have. So it's not that all seafood is bad. There are certain areas like Alaska that's relatively pristine, the Antarctic, and small fish. So very small fish are really healthy for you. Sardines, anchovies. I have sardines pretty much nearly every day for a variety of reasons. And they have very low levels of mercury, and they're also high in a really important essential fatty acid, DHA. So just be careful and make sure you don't eat large seafood because you will invariably become mercury toxic. While we're talking about toxins, another really important toxin to consider is the toxins in your water. And yes, it has chlorine in it and disinfection byproducts, DPBs, which are thousands of times more toxic, and arsenic, and the prescription from your next door neighbor is in there. So these are, and arsenic, but probably the most toxic one in there is one that we have isn't present in Europe, most of Europe, is fluoride. It's added to protect you from dental cavities. And so what's the big problem with fluoride? Well, first of all, and the most significant one, is that it's a mitochondrial poison, just like mercury. It's a little bit different because it's a dielectric blocker, and it's going to impair your mitochondrial cellular membranes for converting sunlight to DC electric current. But additionally, it's a halogen, so this fluoride will displace the iodine in your thyroid gland, and it's real common to develop hypothyroidism or autoimmune thyroiditis when this happens. So the solution for that is to take iodine on a regular basis, but to also avoid drinking tap water that has fluoride. And unfortunately, it's really difficult. It's the most difficult additive to get out of your water. There's really only two solutions to do that, and one is reverse osmosis, which isn't complete, and the other is distilled water, and they both have their downsides because they destructure the water and they take the minerals out. But there are solutions for that. But the best thing is to participate in the legislative process and seek to remove fluoride from your community, which has been done by hundreds of different communities in the United States and North America. And as I said, in most countries in Europe, fluoride is not even put into the water. It was initially, but then they woke up and realized that it shouldn't be there. So it's really important to have fluoride-free, pure, clean water. But once you've got clean water, you can actually improve it by adding hydrogen gas to that. And there's a number of devices that can do that and take it to the next step. It's not necessary, but it does give your body a boost. Hydrogen gas, many people haven't heard of, but it's what our microbiome produces, and we believe it's responsible for many of the benefits we see from a healthy microbiome. You probably aren't aware that there's a large amount of scientific studies, primarily in Asia and Japan, that have been studying this thing for decades and showing and documenting objectively dramatic improvements in people who are drinking water with high amounts of hydrogen gas. And in fact, I'm so convinced that it's the case that I've been using hydrogen gas in my water for the last 5 years. So I think it's a useful strategy and something you might want to consider if you take it the next step. It's certainly not necessary at the beginning levels, but if you want to take it the next step, that's another strategy you can consider. Now, another dental issue that's very common and controversial, of course, are root canals, which are actually performed by drilling a small hole into the biting surface of your tooth, and then the artery and nerve are ripped out. And interestingly, almost everyone knows that dead tissue in your body always gets infected, but dentists don't seem to realize this. They're the only profession that actually leaves dead tissue in your body, and it can result in literally very serious problems. And they believed that they justify leaving that root canal tooth in there because they feel they sterilize, and they do use some procedures to make sure that's done. But what they fail to appreciate that these microtubules are literally miles in each tooth, and it's virtually physiologically impossible to sterilize the entire tooth. So I recommend strongly against root canals. Now, if you have a root canal, does that mean you should have it removed? Not necessarily. You have to evaluate your situation individually and make sure that it's right for you to do. But the best strategy is not to get a root canal, just have it removed. And I've had 3 teeth removed now, and I do not have a root canal because I know the dangers of them. And it's frequently complicated because they tend to disrupt these acupuncture meridians that are associated with the tooth, and they disrupt energy flow distant in the body, typically because most of the teeth are connected or associated with an organ meridian. And it's very common to find a root canal tooth associated with some type of malignancy. Not always, but it's common. If you already have one and you've tried everything and you're not getting better, it's definitely something to consider. One of the most important and unappreciated mitochondrial poisons are non-native or artificial EMFs, electromagnetic fields. So what is non-native? Non-native means artificial. Native means it's natural. So what are examples of this? Well, native EMFs would be the important ones, the ones that we need, like sunlight, which is a vital support nutrient for your mitochondria. You need regular exposure to sunlight on your skin, not through your clothes. So this is why I go out pretty much every day in my shorts, no shoes, on the beach and get sun. And the time I go out varies depending on the time of year. If it's in the winter, it's closer to noon. If it's in the summer, it's closer to 7 or 8 in the morning. But let's talk about the dangerous, the non-native EMFs. Let me break it down into 3. First, we have EMI, which is electromagnetic interference, or dirty electricity. This is the voltage peaks that are in your electrical circuits that are a result of improperly grounded substation, and it can be a problem, and there are different strategies you can use to measure for those. The next is magnetic fields, which are pretty easy to measure with a Gauss meter, and they're pretty static. The third one is microwave radiation, and I'm not talking about your microwave oven, oh, that can be damaging too. The more pervasive exposure we have is from cell phone towers, our own cell phone, and our Wi-Fi routers. So we'll talk about some different strategies you can use for that. So it's the primary exposure you have is through your own cell phone. There's very few of you who don't have a cell phone. And what you don't appreciate, and what I didn't appreciate until recently, is that there's a lot of energy coming out. And then prior to the year 2000, our exposure to the energy coming out, which is typically in the United States measured as microwatts per square centimeter, was like less than 0.001, and now is like hundreds of times higher. And you are getting massive exposure when you hold your cell phone and when it's on. And I first became aware of this from a friend who had a very sophisticated bone analysis and bone density scan done, and he always carried his cell phone in his pocket, and when he got a report back, he had decreased bone density, strong bones otherwise, except for where he was carrying his cell phone. Very strong clue that that cell phone was emitting dangerous radiation. And we know that the cell phone exposure can increase our risk of brain cancer. That's well documented. It's a class 2B carcinogen done by the World Health Organization in 2011. It's well documented. And the reason that you shouldn't get too dissuaded from the fact that think, well, it causes brain cancer or leukemia. I'm not going to get that. I don't know anyone who has that, and they're using cell phones all the time. Don't be deceived. That's not the primary mechanism. The primary mechanism is what we've been talking through the whole episodes in Diet Against Disease, is that it impacts your mitochondrial function. Okay? Now I have here an instrument. I'm just like, this is not fake. You can get this instrument yourself.
Yeah.
It's called a TES593 electrosmog meter. TES593 electrosmog meter, and just go online. You can find them. And it's actually going to actually show us and measure the amount of energy coming out. And the units we're going to measure the energy in is microwatts per centimeter squared, which is a standard in the United States. That's the way these measurements are taken. Where are we at now? We're at 0.1. It's important to understand with these microwaves or any digital source of these EMF frequencies, it's going to be pulsed. It's not a continuous analog signal, it's pulsed. So that's why you're going to see this spike. It goes up and down, up and down. It's not, the beater's not broken. Now I'm going to turn the phone, I'm going to call someone. I'm going to call a local cable company. So that I'll maintain the connection and I'll turn the volume down so you don't hear the computer. Yeah, so it's down now. Okay.
Yeah.
So we won't hear it. And now the phone is activated. So we're up to 2. Let me see where it's at. I can't tilt it.
20.
23. Okay.
Wow.
28. It'll probably go to 200. Is it changing? Where is it?
It's going up and then down 20. Yeah, it's gone up to, wow, it is going up. It jumped up to 38 for a second there.
Okay, so usually it's higher than that.
And then, I mean, well, hold on, what are these numbers? Is this 350? Yeah, it is.
Now it's 350.
Okay.
350. It was under 1, so I lied to you. I said it was 200 times. It's 300 times higher.
Wow.
300 times higher. Now, watch what happens when I move it out here. What happened to it?
Yeah, okay, it's dropped down to 11, 9. Yeah, it's going right down. Yeah, 8, 7, 6.
Okay.
It's a difference. Wow.
Okay. Now, that changed my life when I saw that. So why would you hold the phone? You think so definitely the key is distance, because it drops pretty radically with distance, so that you never want to hold the phone to your head.
Yeah.
Everyone turns on their cell phone.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're talking, and
yeah,
where they're put right to their head, it's like, oh my gosh. Or texting and doing, at least when you have a desktop computer, you've got a keyboard that's usually attached by an electrical cord, so you don't really have any concerns about this electromagnetic radiation. You're far away from the screen, but you're holding your phone when it's actively engaged in communicating with the internet is not a wise strategy, and everyone's doing this.
Dr. Veach did a study where basically he had cyclists. Cycling gave them ketones and actually found that their muscles preferentially used them as the preferred fuel source, even in the presence of glucose. So same thing happens in other tissues. So but I think the main thing is that one thing is a premium fuel source. It's more efficient fuel source.
Whether you're trying to have a six-pack or balanced blood sugar, when you eat less carbohydrates, it's very easy just to stay lean naturally. It's this way of eating, this ketogenic, low-carb, high-fat style diet and periodic intermittent fasting. You just stay lean year-round.
I've been able to maintain so much muscle, and that it's like as if like I'm doing weights. I'm like, this is crazy. How come I just didn't do this? You know, it's so much easier to do all this stuff, and I don't get injured like how I would do with weights. You know, it's crazy.
Love hockey, watching it and fortunately playing it. I am grateful that most of my parts are still working. Skate twice a week. However, I'm only 81. There is a 95-year-old who is in the Guinness Book of World Records who is still playing hockey.
Nutrition plays a really important role when it comes to feeling your best and being your best and performing your best.
By using these basic yet extremely effective principles, a happy and healthy life can be available to everyone. This includes one member of your household that you might not have thought of, your pet.
I made a lot of mistakes when it came to my dog. I never did any research, and I took a beautiful creature that God put on this planet and I destroyed it with my decisions that I made because I didn't know what I was doing. And I never want anybody to make those mistakes again. I don't want people to make those same mistakes.
You're looking for the most nutrient dense, you're looking for the cleanest foods for your kids. In the same way, you have to start to consider that responsibility for the pet kingdom now. And I know a lot of people who are now preparing their own food for their pets and things like that.
So I'm really looking forward to connecting with you in the next episode, and thanks for joining us in Diet Against Disease. Hi, this is Dr. Mercola, and if you've enjoyed the Diet Against Disease series, then I know you'll love to take the next step on your journey to optimal health. My new online course based on my best-selling book, Fat for Fuel, will help teach you to do just that. You'll learn how you can help implement the things you've seen in Diet Against Disease series, like the cyclical ketogenic diet, removing toxins from your life, and restoring your microbiome, and so much more. When you purchase the course, you'll gain immediate access to 7 comprehensive lessons that teach you the keys to help fight chronic disease, help manage cancer, and optimize your health. The knowledge from these courses has the potential to help change your life and empower you with all the tools you'll need to implement a healthy, disease-fighting lifestyles for yourself. Normally, this course costs $299, but if you act today, you can get it for the limited time discount price of just $199. All you have to do is click the button below and sign up today. By doing so, you will be taking an important step to help you and your family take control of your health. If this documentary series has had an impact on you and changed your thinking about diet and disease, then we ask for your help. Please consider supporting us in continuing to get this message to the world. You can support us by owning our collector's package. This will give you an all-access pass to our exclusive 12-part modules featuring never-before-seen footage as well as detailed diet information, weight loss, and aging solutions in this step-by-step blueprint designed to protect your health. This really powerful package is also perfect for those who want to use our detailed program for preventive, proactive measures. So by owning the Diet Against Disease Blueprint today, you'll also unite with us in our mission to save even more lives as we donate a large portion of all sales to charities, including Dr. Seyfried's groundbreaking cancer research, which could change the way the entire world treats cancer. And literally, at least in the United States alone, cut down on 1,500 needless deaths from cancer every day. Together, we can make a difference and begin solving some of the world's most frustrating and devastating medical issues with sound, natural, safe, effective, low-cost health principles. So take action now, and let's help you live the life you envision for yourself and the benefit of your loved ones.